From the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Center for Agricultural Profitability, this is Nebraska Farmcast. I'm Ryan Evans, and joining me on this episode is Dr. Brad Lubben, Extension Policy Specialist with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Brad writes a monthly policy report column for Nebraska Farmer magazine, and today we'll be diving into his latest column, which highlights the Nebraska Rural Poll. The long-running survey from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln offers a unique look into the thoughts and concerns of rural Nebraskans on issues like community well-being, housing, the economy, trade, and even artificial intelligence in this last survey. So we are glad to have Brad joining us again, and you can find his column linked in the description of this podcast and on our center's website at cap.unl.edu. Hi, Brad.
Good to be with you.
Thanks for joining me again. Mm-hmm. And for those who may not be familiar with it, can you just start by giving an overview of the Nebraska Rural Poll? It's, purpose, history, why it's such a valuable tool for understanding rural Nebraska.
Yeah, the Nebraska Rural Poll is actually the longest running poll of its kind in the country. It has started as a endeavor of the community development and rural development folks in the Department of Ag Economics back in the 1990s. The very first poll was in 96. It has continued with efforts and collaboration between Ag Economics and agriculture leadership, education, and communications, and is now part of those ongoing programs offered by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
And who uses the data from the poll when it's all said and done?
Yeah. Well, recognizing first that the poll is, as we describe it, of rural Nebraskans. And our definition of rural in this specific case is everybody outside of the Lincoln and Omaha metropolitan areas. So it's all of the rural counties across Nebraska, and still including counties, for example, around Grand Island that are now technically metro counties, but still somewhat familiar in nature with the rest of rural Nebraska as opposed to Lincoln and Omaha. So think of Nebraska outside of Lincoln and Omaha, and think of the voices from those people and the concerns and interests of those people. How does that get heard? That's been the focus of the rural poll. So it contributes to the public knowledge. It contributes to the public debate and discussion when we're talking about policy issues or strategic plans or community direction. It helps to contribute knowledge and information that helps the process along.
And if you want to find the Rural Poll online, that's going to be ruralpoll.unl.edu, where you can find various reports and summaries of annual data that's gathered from this. And Brad, your column discusses some trends in personal and community well-being from last year's poll. So it found, I think, that people are generally feeling better well off than in previous years. However, those responses are indicating that maybe not as many people are right. feeling that way as in prior years. So there's also, though, on the other side, an uptick in how people view their communities that they live in. So can you kind of walk through that set, and what do you think is driving those trends?
We have asked some long-running questions. There are questions we've asked year in and year out that give us this longitudinal, long-run perspective of what people think. And if you generally ask a person, are you better off? Are we generally getting better off? Well, the continued economic growth or growth in standard of living, we generally might expect that we're all getting better off over time. Of course, individuals face different circumstances, and so some people might feel worse off. Well, we generally more of us feel better off than worse off as compared to, in this case, 5 years ago. That's our reference point. But a smaller percentage feel better off versus worse off than in some previous years. And it's been going down for a couple years. And if we think of the reference point, in this case, 5 years ago for the 2024 poll was 2019. That was before COVID. Mm-hmm. That was before all the contentiousness of recent political elections and rhetoric and so forth. We've had a lot of sort of general social concern and anxiety in the past few years that perhaps it's not as surprising that we've hurt that statistic a little bit. We generally still feel the gains over time and expect that we're better off compared to where we've been or better off compared to our parents and so forth, but a little bit weaker result this time around.
And then another topic you covered in the rural poll for 2024 was housing. And we hear a lot about urban housing in Omaha and Lincoln as these metropolitan areas continue to grow. But of course, rural communities want to grow too. So, you're asking about the availability, the affordability, its impact on community growth. And what do you think stood out the most in responses regarding housing, and what challenges or opportunities are there for rural communities based on what you see?
We asked housing as part of a long set of questions, really, that we ask about sort of local community services and community amenities. And housing is one of those factors that probably has scored the weakest of that over time. A decline in satisfaction, meaning a lack of quality or a lack of affordability, or even just simply a lack of availability. Rural housing has been an issue. And while it's outside the scope of this poll, we know that there have been other studies and other programs focused on rural housing and how do you attract new residents? How do you make your community appealing to future growth? Housing is always at the foundation of some of those things. If you can't find quality housing, if you can't find affordable housing, if you can't find opportunities to grow or build, it's hard to want to go look in a rural community. So housing is one of those issues that where we see concerns, and we know it already. This just really confirms the need for it and attention to how we deal with housing in rural places.
And then the poll also touched on civil discourse and found many rural Nebraskans view the lack of, I guess you could call it, respectful conversation in society as a serious problem. So how does that compare to previous years? Because as you mentioned, the last 5 years have been a bit tumultuous, obviously. Yeah. So how does that compare to previous years? And what do you think any broader implications might be for rural communities and policy discussions?
Well, civil discourse is certainly, we have more of a topical focus on, in this poll, we had a topical focus on what do we know about civil discourse at the moment. We don't have the same longitudinal analysis over time, but the results definitely say that we have concerns about civil discourse and concerns that sort of the ability to work through issues, the ability to talk to neighbors or even talk to family. All of those issues are bigger concerns now than they've been in at least compared to any sort of benchmark. They're big concerns. And so that's part of the function of the rural poll itself, is to raise awareness and raise understanding of issues. That helps the discussion that leads to maybe policy action or local community efforts. That requires civil discourse. It requires civic engagement, and a lack of is really a problem to work through in local society.
And you found that in the poll that rural Nebraskans responded that they were discontented with this a little bit, the nature of things.
Yes, and you might think, well, rural Nebraska is just completely red, right? We know our red and blues in terms of political leanings, and we think we know what rural Nebraska is, or at least the national media and the national stereotype would paint rural Nebraska with a very monolithic color, red. Well, even in very red rural Nebraska, guess what? We don't all agree, and the ability to talk about it, or the ability to work with neighbors, or even with family, as I mentioned, is a need and a challenge for us.
Great. And we've been talking about results from the 2024 rural poll. I know the next poll here for 2025 is set to hit mailboxes here in the spring. So how are recipients for the poll determined? And then what's your message to them to know about how their decision to participate will help to impact Nebraska?
This is a random poll of rural Nebraska residences. And again, I define rural as everything outside of Lincoln and Omaha metropolitan areas. So it certainly still includes city and community residents. It's not physically rural residences outside of town. It's everybody across the broader rural Nebraska. But a random sample of rural households will receive this survey. Several thousand will see it sometime in April and May. And the opportunity to respond is the opportunity to lend your voice to this discussion and help inform our understanding and help inform the continuing public discussion of these issues.
Great. Well, that's Dr. Brad Lubben, an Extension Agricultural Policy Specialist here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And you can read his latest column for Nebraska Farmer magazine through the link in the podcast notes here or on our website at cap.unl.edu. It'll link you right to the article on Nebraska Farmer's website. And Brad, I want to thank you for your time and the great insight today.
Thanks.
Nebraska Farmcast is a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. For the latest research-based information and education resources to manage your farm or ranch operation, visit our website at cap.unl.edu. That's cap.unl.edu.